The letter, the train, and the wrong man. The first snowflakes of winter fell like broken promises as Clara June Redding stepped off the Northern Pacific train at Dry Hollow Station. Her breath formed clouds in the Montana air, and she pulled her worn wool coat tighter, though it did little against the bite of November cold. 7 months of letters pressed against her ribs, tucked safely in the inner pocket of her traveling dress, 7 months of hope written in careful script, now feeling heavier than the leather valise in her hand. At 26, Clara stood taller than most men at the station. Her auburn hair, pinned severely beneath a practical bonnet, caught the weak afternoon light. She'd learned long ago to keep her shoulders straight despite the stares. Back in Philadelphia, her height had been a burden. Here in Montana territory, she'd hoped it might be different. She scanned the platform for Thomas Hale. His last letter had been specific. "I'll be wearing my Sunday coat and holding a white handkerchief. You'll know me by my smile. Dear Clara, I've been practicing it in the mirror like a fool." But there was no smiling man with a white handkerchief. Only wind-weathered faces turning away. Ranch hands loading cargo. And the distant sound of cattle. Clara waited. 10 minutes. 20. The station master emerged from his office, eyeing her with a particular suspicion reserved for unaccompanied women. She straightened her spine, a habit that made her appear even taller, and walked to the ticket window. "Pardon me, sir. I'm looking for Mr. Thomas Hale of the Double H Ranch." The station master's bushy eyebrows rose. "You the mail-order bride?" Heat crept up Clara's neck despite the cold. "Mr. Hale and I have been corresponding. He was to meet me." "That him over there?" The man jerked his thumb toward the saloon across the muddy street. "Been in there near an hour." Clara's stomach twisted. She hefted her valise and crossed the street, her boots squelching in the half-frozen mud. The saloon doors swung open before she reached them, and Thomas Hale stumbled out. He was shorter than she'd imagined, a full head shorter than Clara, with thinning hair and a face reddened by whiskey. His eyes traveled up to meet hers, and she watched his expression shift from anticipation to shock to something uglier. "Clara!" His voice cracked on her name. Mr. Hale." She extended her gloved hand, but he didn't take it. "You didn't. In your letters, you never said—" He gestured vaguely at all of her. "Said what? Mr. Hale? That you were so tall." The word fell between them like a stone in still water. Clara had heard it wrapped in worse terms before Amazon. Giantess, freak of nature, but somehow, in this moment, the simple word tall cut deeper than all the rest. "I wrote that I was of substantial height," she said quietly. "You said it didn't matter. You said you wanted a strong woman for a hard land." Thomas took a step back, his neck craning. "I need a proper wife, not someone who makes me look like a child. Not someone I have to look up to when I speak." "Mr. Hale, please." The other men would laugh. Can you imagine Thomas Hale and his mountain of a wife? He shook his head, already backing away. "I'm sorry. Miss Redding, this won't work. There's a boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Watson takes in women sometimes." And then he was gone, practically running down the street, leaving Clara standing in the cold with her valise, her carefully pressed dress, and 7 months of letters that now meant nothing. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the boarding house on 3rd Street, where Mrs. Watson took one look at her and shook her gray head. "Full up," the woman said through a cracked door. "Try the hotel." The hotel was not full, but somehow they too had no rooms, nor did the second boarding house. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of old blood, Clara understood. Word traveled fast in a town like Dry Hollow. Thomas Hale's rejected bride, the too tall woman from back east, was nobody's problem to solve. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the prairie began. Her valise grew heavier with each step, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves. The letters in her pocket seemed to burn against her ribs. She'd been so careful with them, reading each one by lamplight in her small Philadelphia room, imagining a different life, a better life. The tears came then, hot and shameful. She sank onto a fallen log near a ramshackle fence that marked the boundary between town and wilderness. The wind cut through her coat, but she barely felt it past the ache in her chest. She'd sold everything to buy the train ticket, endured the pitying looks of her sisters, who'd married small, safe men and produced small, safe children, ignored her mother's warnings about getting ideas above her station, all for a man who couldn't even look her in the eye because she was too tall. Clara pulled out the letters, ready to tear them to pieces, when the sound of hammer on wood made her look up. A man worked on the fence not 20 feet away. She hadn't noticed him in her misery. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to being alone. Tall himself, though she couldn't gauge how tall from her seated position, with broad shoulders beneath a worn leather coat, dark hair curled beneath a weathered hat. His hands, even from a distance, showed the capable thickness of a man who worked with horses. He glanced her way, and their eyes met. His were the color of winter sky gray with hints of blue. He didn't smile or frown, just looked at her with a calmness that somehow made her tears fall harder. He set down his hammer and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. Close enough now that she could see the lines around his eyes, the careful way he moved, like a man who'd learned not to spook easily frightened things. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was low, roughened by wind and silence. "You need a place out of the wind." Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand, mortified to be seen like this. "I'm fine, thank you." He studied her for a moment, not the long, measuring look she was used to, but something quieter. His gaze took in her valise, her city clothes, the letters clutched in her fist, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Train from the east came in today," he said, more statement than question. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper and the stub of a pencil, wrote something quickly and held it out to her. "Cabin south of Pine Hill," he said, "about 3 miles out. Wood stove stays warm. Doors never locked." Clara looked at the paper without taking it. "I couldn't—" "Not charity," he interrupted gently. "Just a warm place for tonight. Road gets dangerous after dark." She met his eyes again, searching for the catch, the judgment, the thing that would make this offer hurt, but there was only that same calm regard. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "Because sometimes folks need a place to figure out what comes next, without the whole town watching." He set the paper on the log beside her and walked back to his fence. Clara watched him work for a moment, steady, methodical strikes of the hammer, each nail driven true. When she finally picked up the paper, she saw he'd drawn a rough map beneath the directions. At the bottom, in careful letters, "Bo McAllen. Horses need tending in the morning if you're inclined to stay longer." By the time she looked up again, he was gone, vanished into the growing darkness like smoke. Only the repaired fence remained, standing straight and strong against the coming night. Clara rose, tucked the map into her pocket with the letters, and started walking south toward Pine Hill, toward a cabin she'd never seen, offered by a man who asked nothing in return. Her fingers were numb, her feet ached, and she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since stepping off the train, she felt something other than humiliation. It might have been hope, or merely the absence of despair. Either way, it was enough to keep her walking as the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky. The walk to nowhere and the man by the fence. Clara's boots found rhythm on the frozen road as darkness settled over the Montana landscape. The map in her pocket seemed to pulse with each step, a lifeline to somewhere anywhere that wasn't the muddy streets of Dry Hollow where her humiliation still echoed. 3 miles. In Philadelphia. That meant a pleasant afternoon stroll through Fairmount Park Here, with winter wind cutting through her inadequate coat and her valise growing heavier by the minute. It felt like crossing an ocean. She'd made it perhaps a mile when she had to stop. Her fingers, even inside her kid gloves, had gone past cold into a burning numbness. She set down the valise and tried to warm her hands with her breath, looking back toward town. The lights of Dry Hollow flickered like fallen stars, already distant. No one would come looking. No one cared where Thomas Hale's two tall brides spent the night. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought an odd relief. Clara picked up her bag and continued walking. The road wound between stands of lodgepole pines that creaked in the wind, their shadows making the path treacherous. Twice she stumbled over frozen ruts. Once, a shape crashed through the underbrush elk or deer. She couldn't tell, and her heart hammered against her ribs for long minutes after. She almost missed the cabin. It sat back from the road, sheltered by pines, exactly as the rough map indicated, smaller than she'd expected but sturdy, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. True to his word, the door was unlatched. Inside, Clara found order, a single room with a bed in one corner, neatly made with wool blankets, a table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, cold now but with kindling and logs stacked beside it. On the table, a note, matches in the tin, pump out back for water, coffee and beans in the cupboard, B.M. Clara read it twice, then set about making fire. Her father had taught her this much before he died, how to build the kindling just so, how to coax flame from reluctant wood. Soon warmth crept into the cabin, and with it, the tears she'd been holding back since town. She cried for the fool she'd been, believing words on paper, for the home she'd left behind, small and stifling as it was, for the way Thomas Hale had looked at her like she was a mistake God had made in proportions. When the tears finally stopped, she made coffee. It was bitter and strong, nothing like the tea she preferred, but it warmed her from the inside. She ate cold biscuits from her bag, saving the beans for morning, and tried not to think about morning, about what came next. A horse's whinny cut through the night, followed by the sound of hooves. Clara tensed, hand going instinctively to the poker by the stove, but the hoofbeats passed by, heading up the mountain. Just someone on the road. Still, she barred the door before settling into the narrow bed, fully clothed except for her boots. Sleep wouldn't come. Every sound wind in the pines, settling logs in the stove. Some creature padding across the porch kept her alert. But worse than the sounds was the silence between them, the vast, empty quiet of a place where no one knew her name. Near dawn, exhaustion finally won. Clara dozed fitfully, dreaming of train whistles and letters that turned to ash in her hands. She woke to sunlight streaming through the single window and the smell of smoke from the dying fire. Her body ached from sleeping tense as a board, but she was warm and dry and alive. Small victories. After rebuilding the fire and making more coffee, Clara ventured outside. The cabin sat on a small rise, giving a view of the valley below. Dry Hollow looked smaller from here, manageable. Smoke rose from chimneys. People went about their business. Life continued, indifferent to her heartbreak. She was contemplating the long walk back to town to beg a ticket home. Somehow, when she heard horses, not one this time, but several, and coming closer. Beau McCallan appeared through the trees, leading 3 horses on a line. He sat his mount like he'd been born to it, moving with that same quiet efficiency she'd noticed yesterday. When he saw her on the porch, he touched his hat brim but didn't smile. "Morning," he said, dismounting with easy grace. Up close in daylight, she could see he was perhaps 5 years older than her, early 30s maybe. His face was weathered but not unkind, with a day's worth of stubble in those same steady gray eyes. "Mr. McCallan." Clara stood straighter, though it made her tower over him by several inches. "Thank you for the shelter. I'll be moving on today." He considered this while tying the horses to the porch rail. Where to? The question she'd been avoiding. Back east, I suppose, if I can manage the fare. Train doesn't come through again for 3 days. Clara's heart sank. 3 days in Dry Hollow, facing the whispers and stares. Unless, Bo continued, checking the hooves of a spotted mare. You meant what you said about being inclined to work. Work. He straightened, meeting her eyes directly. I run horses, breeding stock, some training. Lost my help last month when Jake Tilson decided California gold sounded better than Montana winters. Could use someone who's not afraid of hard work. Clara almost laughed. Mr. McCallan, I'm sure you mean well, but I know nothing about horses, and people in town already think— I don't much care what people in town think, he interrupted quietly. And horses don't either. You'd have the cabin, fair wages, and time to figure out what comes next without the whole territory watching. Why would you offer this to a stranger? He was quiet for a moment, running his hand along the mare's neck. My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her in 2 days. I know what it's like when the life you plan disappears between one breath and the next. The simple honesty of it made Clara's throat tight. Besides, he added, you made a good fire. Clean coffee cup. Ashes banked proper. Shows character. Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You judge character by housekeeping. By how folks act when they think no one's watching. He moved to the next horse, a steady-looking bay. Works hard. Mucking stalls, feeding, mending tack. But it's honest. And come spring, if you still want that ticket east, you'll have earned it fair. Clara looked at her hands, city soft despite their size. Thought of her sister's pitying faces if she returned. Of Thomas Hale's backward stumble when he saw her height. I don't even have proper clothes for ranch work. My wife's things are stored in the barn. You're of a size, near enough. She was a tall woman, too. His voice caught slightly on the words, the first crack in his steady demeanor. Clara made her decision then, quick as drawing breath. All right, Mr. McCallan, but I'll need to learn everything. Everything starts with one thing. He unhitched the bay and held out the lead rope. This is Augustus. He's patient with beginners. Clara stepped off the porch and took the rope, aware of how small it looked in her hands. Augustus turned his great head to study her with liquid brown eyes, then snorted softly. He likes you, Bo said. And for the first time, she saw the hint of a smile. That's a start. They spent the morning at the basics. How to lead a horse, how to tie a proper knot, how to read the signals in ears and tail. Bo taught with few words and infinite patience, correcting her grip, showing her how to move with confidence even when she felt none. Horses know when you're afraid, he explained. But they also know when you're trying. They respect the trying more. By noon, Clara's arms ached and her skirts were dusty, but she'd successfully led all 3 horses to water and back. Such a small thing. But when Augustus lipped at her shoulder in what Bo called affection, she felt absurdly proud. They ate lunch on the porch beans and cornbread Bo had brought from his own kitchen. The November sun was thin but welcome, and the view stretched forever. Your wife, Clara ventured. What was her name? Margaret, Maggie. He stared out at the mountains. She would have liked you. She always said tall women had to stick together in this country. How tall was she? 5'10" in her stockings. Used to joke that God made her tall so she could look horse traders in the eye when they lied. Clara smiled, imagining this Margaret who'd worn the clothes now stored in a barn, who'd stood tall in a world that preferred women small. Mr. McCallan. Bo, he corrected, if we're working together. Bo. The name felt strange on her tongue. I need you to know I'm grateful. But I won't. That is, if you're expecting— I'm expecting help with horses, he said firmly. Nothing more, nothing less. You'll have the cabin. I'll have mine a mile up the road. Anybody suggests different. You send them to me. The relief of it, of being understood without having to explain, made her eyes burn. They worked until evening, Bo showing her the basics of feeding and stall maintenance. When he finally prepared to leave, leading the horses back up the mountain, he paused at the edge of the clearing. 6 in the morning. I'll bring the workhorses down. We'll start with the barn. Clara nodded, exhausted but somehow steadier than she'd been in months. I'll be ready. He touched his hat brim again and disappeared into the pines, leaving her alone with the dying light and the strange comfort of knowing tomorrow, at least, had a shape to it. That night, she found Margaret's clothes in a trunk in the barn loft, practical split skirts, sturdy boots only slightly too small, work shirts that fit her shoulders. She laid them out carefully, like armor for a battle she was only beginning to understand. Before sleep, she took Thomas Hale's letters from her pocket, read them one last time by candlelight, seeing now all the things she'd missed, how he'd praised her feminine delicacy without ever meeting her, how he'd imagined a wife who'd look up at him adoringly. She fed them to the stove one by one, watching her foolish dreams turn to ash and drift up the chimney. Tomorrow she'd wake at dawn to learn about horses from a man who didn't stumble when he looked at her. It wasn't the future she'd planned. But as sleep finally claimed her, Clara thought it might be the future she needed. A cabin, a fire, and a woman who didn't want to stay. The rhythm of ranch life caught Clara by surprise. Not the work itself, she'd expected the aching muscles and dirt-caked fingernails, but the way it filled the hollow spaces Thomas Hale had left behind. Each morning arrived with purpose horses to feed, stalls to clean, tack to mend. Each evening brought the satisfied exhaustion of honest labor. By her 4th day, she could tell Augustus from Caesar by the white sock on Augustus's left rear leg. She knew that the mare, Penelope, liked her oats with a handful of molasses, and that the yearling colt would try to nip if you turned your back too long. Bo appeared each morning at 6 sharp, bringing new tasks and quiet instruction. He taught her to read the weather and the movement of clouds, to spot lameness in a horse's gait, to mend a bridle with fingers that had grown surprisingly deft. They worked mostly in companionable silence. When he did speak, it was about practical things which horses needed their hooves trimmed, where to find the best winter grazing, how to tell good hay from bad, but sometimes, usually when they shared the noon meal on the cabin porch, glimpses of the man beneath the reserve would surface. Maggie named that one, he said once, nodding toward Penelope. Said she had the bearing of a queen despite the mud. Or, first winter here, I lost 2 horses to wolves. Maggie sat up 3 nights straight with a rifle. Never did see those wolves, but she swore her vigil kept them away. Clara began to piece together a picture of Margaret McCallan, a woman who'd faced this hard land with humor and determination, who'd stood tall beside her husband, who'd left a space that seemed carefully preserved rather than filled. The cabin, too, revealed its stories. Clara found small touches that must have been Margaret's pressed wildflowers between the pages of an almanac, a quilt with intricate stitching, a receipt for hair tonic from a Denver pharmacy with "For My Brave Girl" written in a man's careful script. She'd meant to stay one night, then 3 days until the train. But when the eastbound locomotive whistled through Dry Hollow that Thursday afternoon, Clara was in the barn, learning to repair a broken harness, and barely noticed the sound. That evening, as she walked back to the cabin alone, Bo always left before dark. Propriety maintained despite the empty landscape she found herself humming. The tune surprised her. She hadn't hummed since receiving Thomas Hale's first letter all those months ago. The next morning brought low clouds and the smell of snow. Bo studied the sky with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to read nature's moods. "Storm coming," he said. "Big one, by the look of it. We'll need to bring the horses closer, get extra feed in the barn." They worked with urgent efficiency, driving the small herd down from the upper pasture. Clara had never moved so many animals at once, but her body seemed to know what to do. Angle here, pressure there, voice steady and sure, when the last horse entered the corral. Bo nodded approval. "You're learning." 2 words, but they warmed her more than coffee. By afternoon, the first flakes fell. By evening, the wind howled like something alive. Clara battened down the cabin, brought in extra wood, and settled by the stove with Margaret's mending basket. She'd found it that morning, full of items that had waited 3 years for attention: socks with holes, shirts missing buttons, a horse blanket with a torn corner. The simple act of threading a needle calmed her. Back in Philadelphia, she'd done piecework for a tailor, her large hands surprisingly delicate with fine seams. Now those same hands worked sturdy thread through wool, each stitch a small victory against entropy. She was halfway through darning a sock when the door rattled against a fierce gust. Then again, but this wasn't wind someone knocked with deliberate force. Clara opened the door to find Bo, snow-covered and grim. "Augustus is down," he said without preamble. "Colic. I need help." She grabbed Margaret's coat, now hers, and followed him into the storm. The walk to the barn, usually 5 minutes, took 15 as they fought through driving snow. Inside, she found Augustus on his side, flanks heaving. "Hold his head," Bo instructed, already working to get the horse up. "Talk to him. Keep him calm." For the next hours, they fought for Augustus's life, walking him when he could stand, keeping him from rolling when the pain peaked. Clara's arms ached from supporting his great head. Her voice went hoarse from the constant stream of soothing words. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when Augustus's eyes rolled white with pain. Bo worked with focused intensity, dosing the horse with remedies from his kit, massaging the distended belly, never stopping his own low murmur of encouragement. Once, when Augustus nearly went down again, their hands met on the lead rope and held together, both refusing to let go. Near midnight, the horse passed gas, an indelicate sound that made them both laugh with relief. Augustus's eyes cleared, his breathing steadied. He lipped at Clara's shoulder, looking for treats. "He'll make it," Bo said, sagging against the stall wall. They were both soaked with sweat despite the cold, covered in hay and horsehair. Clara realized she must look frightful, but found she didn't care. Augustus was alive. That was all that mattered. "Thank you," Bo said quietly. "I couldn't have managed alone." "He's my friend too now," Clara replied, stroking the horse's neck. Something shifted in Bo's expression. "Come on, you'll catch your death in those wet clothes." The storm had worsened while they worked. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see 3 feet ahead. Bo took her arm the first time he'd touched her deliberately and guided her not to her cabin but to his, which sat closer to the barn. "Just until it calms," he said, but they both knew the storm wouldn't calm tonight. His cabin was larger than hers, with 2 rooms instead of 1, but held the same ordered simplicity. He built up the fire while she stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of propriety. "There's clothes in the bedroom," he said without looking at her. "Maggie's things, I kept them." Clara found a wool dress and dry underthings in a cedar chest. Everything smelled faintly of lavender, carefully preserved. She changed quickly, trying not to think about the woman who'd last worn these clothes. When she emerged, Bo had made coffee and set out cold biscuits. He'd changed too, into dry work clothes, his hair still damp and curling at the edges. They sat at his table, listening to the storm rage, not talking about the impropriety of the situation. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said eventually. So she did. Told him about the narrow row house she'd shared with her mother and sisters, about the tailor shop where she'd worked, bending over fine seams until her back screamed, about the church socials where young men's eyes would travel up to her face and then quickly away. "My mother used to say I should be grateful," Clara said. "That being tall meant I could reach high shelves and see over crowds at parades, as if those were compensation for never being asked to dance." "Did you want to dance?" The question surprised her. Yes, sometimes. Not because I cared for any of those boys, but because I wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen. Bo stared into his coffee cup. Maggie loved to dance. Used to make me practice in the kitchen, no music, just counting steps. I was terrible at it. Was she graceful? Lord, no. A smile ghosted across his face. She moved like a newborn colt, all knees and elbows, but she didn't care. Said dancing wasn't about looking pretty. It was about feeling the music in your bones. They lapsed into silence. But it was comfortable now, born of shared labor and worry. The storm continued its assault on the walls, but inside was warm and safe. I should have asked, Bo said suddenly. In your letters to Thomas Hale, what did you tell him about yourself? Clara considered. Everything. I thought, my family, my work, my dreams of a different life. But I see now I told him what I thought he wanted to hear. A woman who could cook and sew and bear children and never complain about the hardships of frontier life. And are you that woman? I can cook and sew. She met his eyes steadily. The rest remains to be seen. He nodded slowly. You did good tonight. With Augustus, not many would have stayed so steady. He trusted me, Clara said simply. I couldn't let him down. They talked until the fire burned low, about horses and weather and the small details of ranch life. Never about Thomas Hale or why Clara remained when the train had come and gone. Never about Margaret except in passing reference. And never about the strange comfort of sitting together while the storm raged outside. When Clara's eyes began to droop, Bo stood. Take the bedroom. I'll stay out here. She protested, but he was firm. The bedroom held more traces of Margaret, a silver brush on the dresser, a Bible with pressed flowers marking pages, but also the deep feather bed that welcomed Clara's exhausted body. She lay awake briefly, listening to Bo moving quietly in the other room, adding wood to the fire. Through the thin wall, she heard him settle onto what must be a makeshift bed near the stove. The storm was already passing, the wind's howl fading to a whisper. Tomorrow would bring questions. If anyone learned she'd spent the night in Bo McCallan's cabin, her reputation, what remained of it, would be ruined. She should care about that, should be planning her departure on the next train, fleeing before more damage was done. Instead, Clara closed her eyes and thought about Augustus's trusting gaze, about Bo's steady presence through the crisis, about the way he'd said, "You did good," like it was simple fact. She'd meant to stay one night, then 3, now, as sleep claimed her in a borrowed bed wearing a dead woman's clothes. She wondered if leaving was still what she wanted. The thought should have frightened her. It didn't. A deal between strangers. Dawn came pale and silent after the storm. Clara woke to find the world transformed so snow blanketed everything in pristine white, erasing the familiar landmarks she'd begun to learn. Through the frost-etched window, she could see Bo already at work, breaking ice from the water troughs. She dressed quickly in Margaret's clothes from the night before, pinned her hair with steadier hands than she'd had in weeks, and emerged to find coffee warming on the stove and a note, checking the herd, breakfast in the warming pan. B. The simple domesticity of it made her chest tight. This wasn't her kitchen, wasn't her life. She was borrowing it, all the clothes, the cabin, even the purpose that got her up each morning. By the time Bo returned, she'd cleaned the dishes and tidied the main room, careful not to disturb anything that seemed particularly placed. He stomped snow from his boots, bringing the cold in with him. Horses weathered it fine. He reported, Augustus is eating like nothing happened. Thank God. The relief surprised her with its intensity. They stood awkwardly in his kitchen, the easy companionship of the night before buried under morning light and propriety. I should get back, Clara said. Check my own cabin. About that. Bo removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. The path's near impassable with snow. Might take a day or two to clear, unless you're set on leaving. I could hitch the sleigh, get you to town for the next eastbound train. The offer hung between them. Clara thought of Philadelphia's soot-stained snow, of her sister's pitying smiles, of bending over fine stitching until her eyes burned. Then she thought of Augustus's soft nose against her palm, of Penelope's regal bearing, of the view from the cabin porch that seemed to stretch to forever. "I should go," she said quietly. "Should?" She met his steady gaze. "That's what a respectable woman would do. Pack up and leave before the talk gets worse, before I cause you any trouble. Has anyone bothered you, said anything?" "No, but—" "Then there's no trouble yet." He hung his hat on the peg by the door. "Stay through the winter, like we agreed. Come spring, if you still want that ticket east, you'll have earned it fair." That was the deal. Deals can be broken, especially when they're made with desperate women who don't know what they're agreeing to. Bo studied her for a long moment. "You think you're the only one who was desperate?" The question caught her off guard. 3 years, he continued, voice low. 3 years of talking to horses because they're the only ones who don't look at me with pity. 3 years of keeping everything exactly as she left it because changing it would mean she's really gone. Then you show up, tears on your face and chin held high anyway. And suddenly, the place doesn't feel like a tomb anymore. Clara's breath caught. "I'm not asking for anything improper," he added quickly. "Just stay, help with the horses. Let me remember what it's like to share a meal with someone who doesn't neigh." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. "Your conversation standards are remarkably low. Horses are good listeners but terrible at coffee." She laughed then, surprising them both. "All right, through winter, but we need to be clear about expectations. Clear as mountain water. You work, I pay fair wages. You keep your cabin, I keep mine. Anyone suggests otherwise." "You'll correct them." "Yes, you've said—" Clara paused. "But what about when people see us together working side by side, they'll talk." "Let them. I've found folks run out of gossip when you don't feed it." He moved toward the door. "Now, we should check that path. See about getting you home. Unless you'd rather take that sleigh ride to town after all." "No." The word came firm and certain. "No, I'll stay." They spent the morning digging through drifts. Bo ahead breaking trail while Clara followed. The snow came to her knees in places, soaking through Margaret's sturdy boots. By the time they reached her cabin, she was breathing hard and sweating despite the cold. Everything inside remained as she'd left it, the mending still piled by her chair, the fire long cold. It looked smaller somehow after Bo's place. Lonelier. "I'll bring Augustus down tomorrow," Bo said from the doorway. "You can work with him in the barn, practice what you've learned." Clara nodded, already rebuilding the fire. When she turned back, he was studying her with that careful expression she was beginning to recognize. "What is it?" "Just thinking you look right. Here, I mean, like the place was waiting for someone to fill it proper." Before she could respond, he was gone, trudging back through their hard-won path. The next days fell into routine. Morning work with the horses, noon meal shared on whichever porch was convenient, afternoon tasks that ranged from mending tack to learning basic veterinary care. Bo taught with patience, and Clara learned with determination that surprised them both. She discovered she had a talent for reading horses' moods, for knowing when Penelope was feeling stubborn or when the yearling needed extra gentle handling. Her large hands, always so awkward with teacups and embroidery, proved perfect for working with the animals. "You've got the touch," Bo said one afternoon, watching her calm a spooked mare. "Some are born with it." "I think they just recognize a fellow outsider," Clara replied, stroking the mare's neck. On the 5th day after the storm, company arrived. Clara was in the barn, learning to clean hooves, when she heard the sleigh bells. Through the open door, she saw a small woman wrapped in furs alight with practiced grace. Louisa May Cartwright, she'd kept her maiden name. Unusual for a widow moved like a woman who knew exactly how much space she deserved in the world. Clara recognized her type immediately. The kind who ruled church socials and decided which families were suitable. The kind who'd looked through Clara at every Philadelphia gathering. "Bo McCallan," Louisa called in a voice like honey over glass. "I know you're here. I saw your tracks." Bo emerged from the feed room, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Cartwright." "Now, Bo, I've told you to call me Louisa. We're practically family, after all." Her gaze found Clara, took in the men's trousers, the work coat, the manure-stained boots. "And who might this be?" "Clara Redding. She's helping with the horses through winter." "Helping." Louisa drew out the word, made it mean something else entirely. "How progressive of you." Clara straightened to her full height, towering over the smaller woman. "Ma'am?" "My goodness, you're very tall, aren't you?" Louisa's smile showed too many teeth. "I heard about poor Thomas Hale's disappointment. Such a shame when expectations don't match reality." Heat flooded Clara's face, but before she could respond, Bo stepped forward. "Was there something you needed, Mrs. Cartwright?" "I came to discuss the Christmas social. The church ladies thought you might donate a horse for the raffle, like dear Margaret used to arrange." Her eyes never left Clara. "She was so involved in town life, such a proper lady, despite her unusual height. But then, she was raised here. She understood how things are done." "I'll consider it," Bo said flatly. "Wonderful. And Miss Redding, was it? You must tell me all about yourself. Where are you from? How did you come to be working for Mr. McCallan? Where exactly are you staying?" "Clara's employment is her business." Bo interrupted. "If you'll excuse us, we have work to finish." Louisa's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. I'll just tell the ladies you'll think about the donation." She moved toward her sleigh, then paused. "Oh, and Bo people are talking about your situation. I thought you should know, as a friend." After she left, trailing perfume and implications, Clara slumped against Augustus's stall. "I should have left," she said. "Now I've brought trouble to your door." That wasn't trouble. That was Louisa May Cartwright doing what she does best, stirring the pot to see what floats to the top. Bo picked up the hoof pick Clara had dropped. "She's been trying to marry me off to her cousin since the day after Maggie's funeral. Maybe you should consider it. She's the right size, at least." The bitterness in her voice made him look up sharply. "Clara." "No, I understand. A proper lady. One who knows how things are done. One who doesn't make you look like a child when she stands beside you." "Is that what you think I care about?" "It's what everyone cares about." She grabbed a curry brush, began working on Augustus with sharp, angry strokes. "I'm too tall, too broad, too much. Always have been." Bo watched her for a moment, then quietly said, "Maggie was afraid to ride for the first year we were married." Clara's hand stilled. Terrified of horses, used to shake when she had to get near one. Her father told her she'd never make a ranch wife, that she was too fearful, too soft. He took the brush from Clara's hand. But she learned, faced down that fear every day, until one morning she saddled Penelope herself and rode to town like she'd been born to it. "What's your point?" "My point is that being too much of one thing usually means you're exactly enough of something else." He handed the brush back. "Besides, I haven't had to stoop to fix a roof beam since you started here. That's worth any amount of Louisa Cartwright's gossip." The simple practicality of it, the easy acceptance, nearly undid her. Clara turned back to Augustus to hide the moisture in her eyes. "I'll think about the Christmas social donation," Bo added. "Might be good to show the town that nothing improper is happening here. You could come too, if you wanted." "To a church social looking like this," she gestured at her work clothes. "I imagine you clean up nice enough." His voice was carefully casual. "Maggie's Sunday dress is in the trunk, the green one. She always said it was too long on her." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded and kept brushing Augustus until his coat shone like copper in the lamplight. Bo worked beside her in companionable silence, each tending their own horse. And slowly, the knot of shame Louisa had tied began to loosen. That evening, alone in her cabin, Clara pulled out paper and pen to write to her sisters. She'd promised to send word when she was settled. But what could she say that she'd traded one humiliation for another? That she spent her days knee-deep in horse manure and her evenings alone in a borrowed cabin, that a quiet man with steady hands was teaching her she might be worth more than her failures. In the end, she wrote simply, "I am well. The work is hard but honest. The mountains are beautiful. I may stay through winter." She didn't mention Thomas Hale or Bo McCallan. Didn't explain why she'd traded city streets for Montana snow. Her sisters wouldn't understand anyway. They'd never stood tall enough to make men step backward. Never felt too much for every space they entered. But tomorrow, Clara would rise at dawn to tend horses who didn't care about her height. She'd share the noon meal with a man who valued her steady hands over her proper proportions. She'd face down whatever gossip Louisa Cartwright stirred up, because she'd faced worse and survived. The deal had been simple work through winter, earn her passage home. But as Clara banked the fire and prepared for bed, she wondered if simple deals could grow into something more, if a desperate woman and a lonely man might find, in their shared silences and small victories, a different kind of belonging. She'd meant to stay 3 days, then through the storm, now through winter. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally staying for herself. First snowstorm, first crack of feeling. December arrived with teeth. The storm that descended on Dry Hollow 3 weeks before Christmas made the earlier snow seem like a gentle warning. This was winter showing its true face, howling wind that shook the cabin walls. Snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the window. Clara woke to silence, which after hours of wind felt ominous. Her breath clouded in the cold air. The fire had died to ash. She dressed quickly in layers chemise, wool dress, Margaret's heavy work coat, and peered outside. Nothing. White. Nothing as far as she could see. The path to the barn had vanished. The fence posts were mere bumps in an ocean of snow. Her first thought was for the horses. Her second, shamefully quick on its heels, was for Bo. His cabin sat higher up the mountain. Had he? A sharp rap on the door interrupted her spiraling worry. She yanked it open to find him standing there, frosted like a winter spirit but whole. "Horses are secure," he said without preamble. "Move them all to the big barn before it got bad, but we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where you're snowed in for at least 3 days, maybe more. This cabin's sturdy, but that roof won't hold much more weight. Needs clearing." Clara looked up at her roof, invisible under its white burden. "I'll get the ladder." "No." His voice came sharp. "Too dangerous. Wind's picking up again. You're coming to my place." "Bo, we can't. The talk." "Would you rather freeze for the sake of gossip? My cabin's built stronger, closer to the barn. We can tend the horses easier from there." As if to emphasize his point, a crack echoed from above. Snow had found some weakness in the roof beams. "Pack what you need," he said. "Quick now." Clara didn't argue further. She gathered clothes, her few personal items, the mending she'd been working on. Within minutes, they were fighting through thigh-deep snow toward his cabin. The wind hit like a physical force, driving snow into every gap in their clothing. Clara couldn't see more than an arm's length ahead, but Bo's hand found hers, guiding her through the white blindness. By the time they stumbled through his door, her face was numb and her skirts were frozen stiff. "Get those wet things off," Bo ordered, already feeding the fire. "There's wool blankets in the chest." She retreated to the bedroom, peeling away frozen layers with clumsy fingers. Everything was soaked through despite her coat. She wrapped herself in blankets that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, then ventured back to the main room. Bo had built the fire to a roar. He'd changed, too, into dry work clothes, and was heating water for coffee. They stood awkwardly on opposite sides of the room. the propriety that had seemed manageable in daylight, now fraught with complexity. "I can sleep in the barn," Clara offered, "with the horses. In this cold, don't be foolish." He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "You'll take the bedroom, like before. Storm can't last forever." But it could last long enough to ruin her reputation completely. Clara sipped the bitter coffee and tried not to think about what Louisa May Cartwright would say. They spent the day in careful coordination, tending horses, melting snow for water, maintaining distance despite the close quarters. When evening came, they shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, eaten in silence, broken only by the wind's howl. "Tell me about before," Beau said suddenly. "Before the letters, before Thomas Hale." Clara considered. "There's not much to tell. I worked in a tailor shop, lived with my mother until she died 2 years ago, watched my younger sisters marry one by one. No suitors of your own. Oh, there were a few who tried. Timothy Morrison, whose mother pushed him to court me because she thought I'd be too grateful to demand much. James Hartley, who told me I'd make a good farmer's wife since I was built for work. And Robert Cunningham, who got drunk at a church social and announced he'd always wondered what it was like to climb a tree." Beau made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "So, when Thomas Hale's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, 'Prosperous rancher seeks correspondence with a marriage-minded lady of good character,' I thought. Why not? He couldn't see my height through letters. But he asked for a photograph. I sent one, sitting down. In retrospect, I see the dishonesty in that." She stared into her coffee. "I wanted so badly to be chosen for once, to have someone say yes before they saw all the ways I didn't fit." "We all want that," Beau said quietly. They lapsed into silence again. The storm shook the windows, reminding them both of the world beyond these walls waiting to judge. "Your turn." Clara said, "Tell me about Maggie. Really tell me." Beau was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then she had a laugh that started in her toes. "Never did anything by halves, loved fierce, fought fiercer. Used to say I was too quiet for my own good, that I'd turn to stone if she didn't shake me up regular." "How did you meet?" "Her father brought her west from Chicago. She hated it at first. Hated the dirt, the isolation, the way women looked at her for being too tall, too loud, too much city polish for frontier life." He smiled at the memory. "But she was too stubborn to go back. Said she'd make Montana love her if it killed her." "And did she, in her way, started the ladies' reading circle? Organized the first real Christmas social? Taught half the town's children their letters? By the end, even Louisa Cartwright had to respect her, though she never liked her." "Why not?" "Because Maggie didn't apologize for taking up space, didn't make herself smaller to fit others' comfort." He looked at Clara directly. "Reminded me of someone else in that way." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. She busied herself clearing dishes, aware of his eyes following her movement. The second day of the storm brought a different kind of tension. The forced proximity, the shared meals, the evening hours by the fire, it all felt dangerously domestic. When their hands accidentally touched passing a dish, both jerked back as if burned. But sometime during that long day, the careful distance began to feel less like protection and more like punishment. They started talking, really talking, about books they'd read, places they'd dreamed of seeing, small memories that shaped them. "I wanted to study at the Women's Medical College," Clara admitted. "Thought these hands might be good for healing instead of just hemming." "Why didn't you—" "Money, expectations, the general agreement that I was already too peculiar without adding education to my faults." "Medicine's loss," Beau said simply, and meant it. That night, as Clara settled into the bedroom, she heard him moving restlessly in the main room. The wind had calmed, but snow still fell steady. Through the thin door, she heard him add wood to the fire, pace the floor, finally settle with a creak of boards. She lay awake thinking about his careful kindness, the way he never made her feel too large or too loud or too anything, just present, just herself. It was a dangerous thought for a woman in a borrowed bed wearing a dead wife's nightgown. The third day dawned clear and brutal cold. They ventured out to dig paths to the barn, working side by side in companionable rhythm. The horses greeted them with eager whinnies. Augustus especially vocal in his demands for attention. "Spoiled," Bo said, but his hands were gentle as he checked the animal over. "Loved," Clara corrected, offering the horse a precious bit of carrot. They were heading back to the cabin when Clara's foot found ice beneath the snow. She went down hard, Bo catching her arm just in time to prevent a complete fall. For a moment they stood frozen, her weight supported by his grip, faces close enough to see breath mingle in the cold air. "Steady," he murmured, but neither moved to create distance. Clara became acutely aware of his hand on her arm, the concern in his gray eyes, the way the winter sun caught in his dark hair. Something shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. "I'm all right," she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. They separated carefully, finished the walk in silence. But that night, as they shared supper, the quiet felt different, charged with possibility neither dared name. Storm should break by morning. Bo said, "You can go back to your cabin." "Yes," Clara agreed, though the thought brought no relief. They were cleaning dishes, she washing, he drying when Clara's hand slipped on a soapy plate. Without thinking, she reached for the dish towel at the same moment he did, their fingers tangled in the cloth. Neither pulled away. "Clara," he said, voice rough. "I should go back to my cabin," she said quickly. "As soon as the path is clear. This isn't... We can't..." "I know." But his thumb moved against her knuckles, just once, before he let go. They finished the dishes in silence, careful not to touch again. But when Clara bid him good night and retreated to the bedroom, she pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart racing like a spooked horse. Through the wall, she heard him banking the fire, settling onto his makeshift bed. The storm was passing, taking with it the excuse for their proximity. Tomorrow she'd return to her cabin. They'd resume their careful distance and pretend these 3 days hadn't cracked something open between them. But as sleep finally came, Clara found herself thinking not of tomorrow's propriety, but of that single brush of his thumb against her skin. Such a small thing, such a dangerous thing. The storm had trapped them together. What frightened her was how little she'd minded being trapped. Whispers in Dry Hollow. The storm's aftermath brought more than clear skies. It brought consequences. Clara first noticed the change when she ventured into town for supplies 2 days after returning to her cabin. The general store, usually filled with casual chatter, fell silent when she entered. Women who'd nodded politely before now turned their backs, suddenly fascinated by bolts of calico. Mr. Henderson, the shopkeeper, served her with professional courtesy but none of his usual pleasantries. As Clara selected flour and coffee, she heard whispers sharp as winter wind. 3 days and nights. Saw smoke from only one chimney. What kind of woman? She kept her chin high, paid for her goods, and left with measured steps. But outside, her hands shook as she loaded the supplies into the wagon Bo had lent her. The situation worsened at the post office. Mrs. Garrett, the postmistress, handed over Clara's mail a letter from her sister with lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. "Must be nice," the woman said, "having such a accommodating employer." Mr. McCallan has been entirely proper," Clara replied evenly. "Oh, I'm sure, proper as a man can be with an unmarried woman under his roof for 3 days." Mrs. Garrett leaned forward. "We all understand necessity, Miss Redding, but perhaps it's time you considered other arrangements before more storms come." Clara left without another word, but the damage was spreading like spilled ink. At the butcher shop, Mr. Kowalski served her last, though she'd arrived before 3 other customers. At the dry goods store, young Mrs. Thornton pulled her daughter away when Clara smiled at the child. Even the livery stable boy snickered when she brought the wagon back. But the worst came as she was preparing to leave town. A group of children playing in the street pointed and laughed. One boy, perhaps 8 years old, called out, "There goes the giant lady. My PA says she's keeping house with Mr. McCallan like a—" Benjamin Fletcher. An older woman grabbed the boy's ear. "Mind your tongue." But the damage was done. Clara heard the word he'd almost said, felt it follow her out of town like a shadow. She drove back to the ranch with tears freezing on her cheeks. Grateful Bo was working the far pasture and wouldn't see her distress. In her cabin, she unpacked supplies with trembling hands, trying not to think about the letter from Philadelphia burning in her pocket. Her sister Ruth's handwriting spelled out familial concern and thinly veiled satisfaction. "We heard through Cousin Frederick about your situation. Really, Clara, a ranch hand. After that embarrassment with Mr. Hale, perhaps it's time to come home before you ruin yourself entirely. Harold's brother is still unmarried." Clara fed the letter to the stove, watching her sister's judgment curl into ash. That evening, Bo appeared at her door with his usual quiet knock. She'd managed to compose herself, splashing cold water on her face and pinning her hair severely back. "Brought the grain ledgers," he said. "Thought you might start learning the accounting side." She invited him in, poured coffee, tried to pretend everything was normal. But Bo had spent too many years reading horses not to recognize distress in humans. "What happened?" he asked simply. "Nothing, just town talk." "Clara." She set down her cup harder than intended. "What do you think happened? I walked through town like a scarlet woman. Mothers pulled their children away. The butcher served everyone else first. And a child called me names I won't repeat." Bo's jaw tightened. "Who?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Why?" The word burst out sharper than intended. "So you can defend my honor, make it worse. They already think, they already believe." "I know what they think." His voice was dangerously quiet. Louisa Cartwright made sure of that. She visited 3 households yesterday, expressing concern about the situation at the McCallan Ranch. Clara laughed bitterly. "Of course she did." "I'll speak to her. Make it clear." "Make what clear? That nothing happened. They won't believe it. In their minds, I'm already ruined. A desperate woman who threw herself at the first man who showed kindness." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I should leave. Tomorrow. Before this gets worse." "Is that what you want?" She whirled on him. "What I wanted Thomas Hale to look at me without revulsion. I wanted to build something new in a place that didn't know my failures. I wanted—" Her voice broke. "I wanted to belong somewhere, just once." Bo rose slowly, crossed to where she stood, not touching, but close enough that she could smell leather and horses and the coffee they'd shared. "You belong here," he said. "With the horses, with the work, with—" He stopped, jaw working. "Say it," Clara whispered. But he stepped back instead. "I won't make this worse for you. If leaving is what you need." "Don't." She turned away. "Don't be noble. Don't be careful. For once, just don't." The silence stretched between them, taut as fence wire. "That first day," Bo said finally, "when I found you crying by the fence, you know what I thought." Clara shook her head. "I thought there's someone who knows what it costs to hope for something and watch it die." He moved to the door. "Stay or go, Clara. But don't let Louisa Cartwright and her gossips make the choice for you. They ran Maggie ragged trying to make her fit their mold. I won't watch them do it to you too." After he left, Clara sat in the gathering dark, mulling over his words. She thought about Augustus trusting her touch, about Penelope's regal acceptance, about the view from the barn on clear mornings when the mountains looked close enough to touch. Most of all, she thought about Bo's steady presence, the way he'd said, "You belong here," like it was simple fact. The next morning brought Louisa May Cartwright herself, arriving in her fancy sleigh with 2 other church ladies as witnesses. Clara was mucking stalls when they appeared, and she didn't stop working. "Miss Redding," Louisa called from the barn entrance, clearly unwilling to risk her skirts in the muck. "A word, if you please." "I'm working, Mrs. Cartwright." "Yes, I can see that." Louisa's tone suggested this was precisely the problem. "We've come on behalf of the Ladies' Moral Committee. There are concerns about your arrangement here." Clara moved to Penelope's stall, continuing her work. "My employment? You mean, is that what we're calling it?" One of the other women tittered. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara said calmly, recognizing the shopkeeper's wife. "How's your husband's rheumatism? I heard the storm made it worse." The woman flushed. "Don't change the subject. You spent 3 nights surviving a blizzard." Clara interrupted. "Would you prefer I'd frozen to death? Would that have been more proper?" "There's no need for dramatics," Louisa said. "We're simply concerned about appearances, about the message this sends to our impressionable young people." Clara finally turned, pitchfork in hand, towering over all 3 women. "What message is that? Exactly that a woman can work hard, that she can earn honest wages, that she can refuse to die for the sake of gossip. That certain standards must be maintained." Louisa snapped. "You're new here, so perhaps you don't understand. This is a respectable community. We have ways of doing things, like driving grieving widowers to isolation, like deciding who's worthy based on their height or circumstances." Clara stepped closer, and all 3 women retreated. "I understand perfectly. Mrs. Cartwright." Louisa's face flushed ugly red. "You're making a mistake, Miss Redding. This town has ways of dealing with women who don't know their place." "My place is wherever I earn it," Clara said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, these stalls won't clean themselves." She turned her back on them, returning to work behind her. Louisa hissed something about seeing what the town council thinks before retreating with her entourage. Clara's hands shook as she worked, but beneath the fear was something else, anger, clean and bright as a new blade. That afternoon, Beau found her in the barn, brushing Augustus with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "Heard you had visitors," he said. "News travels fast. Louisa's already spreading word about your insolence. Says you threatened her with a pitchfork." "I held a pitchfork. If she felt threatened, that's her guilty conscience." Beau's mouth quirked. "Remind me not to cross you during mucking time." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "I'm done being afraid of them." "Good." He picked up a curry comb, began working on Caesar. "Because I entered Penelope in the Christmas race, you'll need to ride her." Clara's hand stilled. "I don't understand." "Town tradition. Every Christmas social includes a ladies' race. Maggie won 3 years running," made Louisa furious. He glanced at her. "You game?" "I've barely learned to stay in the saddle." "You've got 2 weeks, and Penelope wants to run. She's been waiting for someone tall enough to handle her stride." Clara looked at the mare, who gazed back with liquid eyes that seemed to say, "Well, they'll hate it." Clara said, "They already hate it. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." She thought about Louisa's threats, the children's taunts, the cold shoulders in town. Then she thought about Beau's faith in her abilities, Penelope's patient strength, her own growing love for this work. "All right," she said, "teach me to race." Beau's smile was worth whatever fresh gossip would follow. "We'll start tomorrow, early, before the busybodies wake." That evening, Clara wrote a different letter to her sisters. "The work grows easier each day. I've found I have a talent for horses and an employer who values that above all else. Yes, people talk. They always have. But I'm learning the difference between noise and truth. Don't expect me home for Christmas. I have a race to run." She sealed it with wax and determination. already imagining Louisa Cartwright's face when the two tall women on the magnificent mare crossed the finish line first. Let them whisper. She had work to do. The town meeting, the vote, and the voice that stood tall. The Dry Hollow Town Hall had never been meant for controversy. Built 15 years prior with donated lumber and community hope. It served for dances, weddings, and the monthly council meetings where farmers argued about fence lines and water rights. But on this December evening, with snow falling soft outside, the hall bristled with a different energy. Clara paused at the entrance, her hand tightening on Beau's arm. She'd dressed carefully in Margaret's green wool dress, the one that was indeed too long on its original owner, but fit Clara perfectly. Her hair was pinned in a style her Philadelphia sisters would approve of, though nothing could disguise her height or the work-strengthened set of her shoulders. "You don't have to come in," Beau said quietly. "I can handle this alone." "No." Clara straightened her spine, adding another inch to her already considerable height. "They want to vote on selling Pint Ridge. I've ridden those trails. I've seen what that land means to your ranch, to the wild horses. I won't hide while others decide its fate." Inside, the hall was packed. Ranchers, townspeople, merchants all crammed onto benches and standing along walls. At the front, Mayor Tobias Werner called for order while Thomas Hale and several other men studied surveying maps spread across a table. Clara's entrance caused a ripple of whispers. She felt eyes track her movement as Beau guided her to a bench near the middle. Several women pulled their skirts aside as she passed, as if her presence might contaminate them. "Let's come to order," Mayor Werner called, his German accent still thick after 20 years in Montana. "We're here to discuss the railway company's offer for Pint Ridge. Mr. Hale, you have the floor." Thomas stood, avoiding looking in Clara's direction. He'd gained weight since their brief encounter, his vest straining at the buttons. "Gentlemen and ladies," he added with false courtesy, "the Northern Pacific offers us opportunity. $20,000 for the ridgeland, plus promises of a spur line that would bring prosperity to Dry Hollow." "Progress," someone shouted from the back. "About time." Thomas continued, warming to his theme. "With a rail connection, we could ship cattle easier, bring in goods cheaper. The ridge is just wilderness, a few deer. Some wild horses no one claims. Small price for securing our future." Applause scattered through the crowd. Clara noticed Louisa Cartwright clapping with particular enthusiasm from her seat among the town's leading ladies. "Furthermore," Thomas added, "I've negotiated percentage ownership for any landowner who votes in favor. We'd all profit from this sale." More applause. Louder now. Mayor Werner had to call for quiet. "Anyone wish to speak against the proposal?" Beau stood slowly. "That ridgeland waters half the valley. The natural springs there feed Willow Creek, which every ranch downstream depends on. Sell it to the railway. Let them blast through for their tracks. And we risk losing water rights we've counted on for decades." "McAllen's just worried about his precious wild horses," someone called out. "Man cares more about animals than progress." "I care about sustainable ranching," Beau replied calmly. "Something that'll matter long after the railroads moved on to the next profitable venture." An old rancher named Samuel Morrison stood. "Boy's got a point about the water. My cattle drink from Willow Creek." "The railway promises not to disturb the water flow?" Thomas countered. "Railway promises aren't worth the paper they're written on." Another rancher growled. The debate grew heated. Men shouted over each other while Mayor Werner pounded his gavel futilely. Clara watched it all, noting how Thomas Hale and his supporters kept returning to profits and progress, while Beau and the older ranchers focused on land and legacy. Then Louisa Cartwright stood, and the room quieted. When the self-appointed social leader of Dry Hollow spoke, people listened. "I think," she said in her honeyed voice, "we should consider what kind of town we want to be. Progressive, connected to the wider world, or backward, clinging to old ways." Her gaze found Beau. "Some people prefer isolation, keeping their arrangements, away from civilized scrutiny. But most of us want better for our children. The implication hung heavy. Several people glanced between Louisa, Beau, and Clara. Speaking of scrutiny, Louisa continued, I wonder if everyone voting tonight actually has that right. After all, some here aren't landowners or even proper residents, just temporary help. Clara felt heat rise in her face as more heads turned her way. Mrs. Cartwright raises a valid point, Thomas said quickly. Perhaps we should verify who's eligible to vote before. I have something to say. Clara stood, and the words came out stronger than she'd expected. The hall fell silent, all eyes on the too tall woman in the green dress. Mrs. Cartwright is right. I'm not a landowner. I'm temporary help, as she so delicately put it. Clara moved to the aisle, where her height was even more apparent. I came here with foolish dreams and found them shattered within an hour of arrival. She looked directly at Thomas Hale, who reddened and studied his boots. But in the weeks since, I've learned something about this land you're so eager to sell. I've ridden those ridges at dawn, seen the wild horses that have run free there for generations. I've watched eagles nest in the pines you want to clear. I've knelt by those springs and tasted water that runs cleaner than anything I knew in the city. Clara moved toward the front, and people unconsciously made way. You speak of progress, Mr. Hale, of profits and prosperity. But I've seen what the railroad does to places it touches. In Pennsylvania, I watched streams turn black with coal dust, saw forests leveled for ties and fuel. Progress, they called it, while farmers downstream wondered why their crops failed. You have no right to speak here, Louisa interrupted. You're not. I'm not what? Clara turned on her, and Louisa actually stepped back. Not married, not small enough to be proper, not willing to bow my head and accept whatever scraps of belonging you decide I deserve. The hall buzzed with shock at her boldness. I may not have voting rights, Clara continued, addressing the room now. But I have eyes to see and a mind to think, and I see a town being asked to trade its birthright for railroad promises. Birthright, Thomas scoffed. It's unused land. Unused by you, perhaps. But the Salish people used it for generations before we arrived. The wild horses use it now. The eagles, the deer, the springs that water your cattle, they all use it. Clara stood at her full height. Just because something doesn't generate profit doesn't mean it lacks value. An old woman in the back, Mrs. Muller. The baker's mother cackled. Girl's got spine. First interesting thing to happen at one of these meetings in years. This is highly irregular, Mayor Werner said weakly. So is selling land that's been held in common trust, Beau said, standing to join Clara. My wife always said this town's strength was in what we preserved, not what we sold. Your wife is dead, Louisa said coldly. Perhaps it's time to stop hiding behind her memory. The cruelty of it shocked even Louisa's supporters. In the silence that followed, Clara spoke again, softer now, but no less firm. I've been in Dry Hollow 2 months, long enough to be gossiped about, whispered over, judged for circumstances beyond a blizzard's survival, but also long enough to see what you have here. Community, clean water, land that feeds you, skies you can actually see stars in. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that had avoided hers for weeks. I'm too tall. I'm unmarried. I'm an outsider. All true. But I'm also someone who's seen what happens when towns trade their souls for railroad money. Don't make Philadelphia's mistake. Don't sell what you can't buy back. Clara returned to her seat in the ringing silence. Her hands trembled, but she kept them folded calmly in her lap. Mayor Werner cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. Any other comments before we vote? Old Samuel Morrison stood again. I'd like to say something. That young lady might be tall as a tree, a newcomer besides. But she talks sense. My granddaddy always said to watch what a person does when they got nothing to gain. Miss Redding gains nothing from speaking up except more gossip. But she spoke anyway. That tells me something. Tells me she's overstepping. Thomas muttered. Tells me she cares about this place. Samuel shot back. Which is more than I can say for folks who see dollar signs instead of land. More discussion followed. But Clara had shifted something in the room's mood. When Mayor Werner finally called for the vote, hands raised slower, more thoughtfully. All in favor of accepting the railway's offer. Thomas Hale's hand shot up, followed by Louisa and her husband, several merchants, and some younger ranchers. Clara counted quickly, perhaps 15 in all. All opposed. Bo raised his hand, followed by Samuel Morrison and the older ranchers. Then, surprisingly, Mrs. Muller in the back. Then the blacksmith, the schoolteacher. More and more hands rose until they clearly outnumbered the supporters. Motion fails. Mayor Werner announced, Pint Ridge remains community land. Thomas Hale's face purpled. This is a mistake. You're letting sentiment override sense. Maybe so, Samuel Morrison said, but it's our mistake to make. As the meeting dissolved into arguments and recriminations, Clara felt a hand on her elbow. Bo guided her through the crowd toward the door. She caught fragments of conversation. I never seen anything like it. Brass of that woman. Made sense, though, about the water. Still ain't proper. Her living out there. Outside, snow fell heavier. Bo helped her into his wagon, then climbed up beside her. They rode in silence for a while, wheels creaking through fresh powder. You didn't have to do that, he finally said. Yes, I did. It'll make things harder for you in town. They were already hard. He glanced at her. That was brave, maybe foolish, but brave. Maggie would have done the same. No, his voice was thoughtful. Maggie would have worked behind the scenes, talked to the women privately, built consensus over weeks. You just stood up and said what needed saying. Devil take the consequences. That's your own kind of courage. They reached the fork where the road split between their cabin. Thank you, Bo said simply, for caring about the ridge, about the ranch, about... He stopped, cleared his throat. Just thank you. Clara touched his hand on the reins, briefly. I meant what I said in there. This place matters. What you've built here matters. I couldn't let them destroy it for railroad money. In the lamplight from the wagon, she saw something shift in his expression. But before either could speak further, a rider approached through the snow, young Jim Fletcher, the livery owner's son. Mr. McCall Miss Redding Pa sent me to warn you. Thomas Hale's gathering men at the saloon, talking about teaching lessons and protecting the town's moral fiber. Pa thought you should know. Bo's face hardened. How many men? Maybe 6 or 7, but they're drinking heavy. Thank you. Jim, tell your father we're grateful for the warning. The boy rode off, and Bo turned the wagon toward Clara's cabin. Pack what you need, he said. You're staying at my place tonight. Bo, we can't keep... They're drunk and angry, and you publicly humiliated Thomas Hale. I won't leave you alone to face whatever foolishness they're planning. Clara wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom. Just tonight. We'll see. As they reached her cabin, Clara gazed back toward town, where lamplight glowed faintly through the snow. She'd stood tall in that hall, spoken truth to people who didn't want to hear it. Tomorrow there would be consequences. There always were for women who refused to shrink. But tonight, she'd helped save a piece of wild Montana. That was worth whatever came next. The vote, the fallout, and the knock at night. The silence that followed the vote rang louder than any shouting. Clara sat beside Bo on the wagon ride home, watching snow erase the world behind them. Her words in the town hall echoed in her mind, bold words, necessary words, but words that would cost her. You're too quiet, Bo said as they reached his cabin. Thinking about consequences. Regrets? No. Clara pulled Margaret's coat tighter. Just counting what comes next. Inside. Bo built up the fire while Clara made coffee with hands that barely trembled. The familiar routine of it measuring grounds. Heating water steadied her nerves. They'd done this before during the blizzard. But tonight felt different. Tonight she'd chosen to stand tall in front of the whole town. And he'd stood with her. They won't let this go, Clara said, handing him a cup. I know. Louisa especially. I challenged her in public. You spoke truth in public. There's a difference. They sat at his table, the lamp casting a warm circle of light that held back the darkness pressing against the windows. Outside, the snow continued its quiet burial of the world. Tell me about the railroad. Bo said, what you saw in Pennsylvania. Clara wrapped her hands around her cup, remembering. I was 12 when the Pennsylvania Railroad extended through our valley. Everyone was so excited, progress coming to our doorstep. My father spoke at the ceremony, talked about prosperity and connection to the wider world. What happened? Everything Thomas Hale promised and more. The town grew. Merchants got rich. For about 5 years, it seemed like paradise. She stared into her coffee. Then the coal companies followed the rail lines. The streams turned black. The air tasted like metal. My mother developed a cough that never left until the day she died. Bo reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The worst part, Clara continued, was watching my father realize what he'd helped bring about. He'd been so proud, so certain he was building a better future. Instead, he'd traded our clean valley for railroad money. He never forgave himself. That's not what will happen here. No, Clara agreed. Because you stopped it. You and Samuel Morrison and the others who remember what matters. You stopped it. Bo corrected. I'd have lost that vote without your speech. You changed minds in there. Clara made them see past the money to what we'd really be losing. A comfortable silence fell between them. The fire crackled. Snow whispered against windows. In this warm circle of light, the town's judgment seemed very far away. I should check the horses, Bo said eventually, though he made no move to rise. They're fine. You checked them twice before we left for town. Old habit? Maggie used to say I'd check horses in my sleep if I could figure out how. Clara smiled. She knew you well. She did. Bo studied his coffee. Would have liked you. I think you both have that way of seeing through to what matters. Even though I'm nothing like her? Because you're nothing like her. He met her eyes. Maggie needed this place to become herself. You became yourself despite every place trying to make you smaller. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither quite dared acknowledge. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken, wondered if he could hear it in the quiet cabin. A sharp knock shattered the moment. Bo was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the rifle by the door. Who's there? It's Sam Morrison. Bo, need to talk to you. Bo relaxed slightly, opening the door to reveal the old rancher, snow-covered and grim. Sam, what brings you out in this trouble? Sam's eyes found Clara. Glad you're here too. Miss, saves me a trip to warn you separate. Come in, Bo said. Coffee's hot. Sam accepted gratefully, settling his weathered frame by the fire. Thomas Hale's been busy since the vote. Him and Jasper Collins and a few others been drinking hard at the saloon, talking about defending the town's honor and showing people their place. Jim Fletcher mentioned as much. Bo said, it's worse than just talk. They're planning to ride out here tonight, teach you both a lesson. They said Thomas is especially fired up about being embarrassed by a woman in public. Clara's stomach tightened. How many? 6, maybe 7, all drunk as skunks and mean with it. Sam sipped his coffee. I told Sheriff Banks, but he said unless they actually do something, it's just men letting off steam. Banks is Thomas's cousin, Bo said flatly. That he is. Sam set down his cup. Point is, you need to be ready. These boys are feeling their oats and looking to prove something. Let them come. Bo said quietly. Now, son, don't go getting noble. You're one man against 6 or 7. Not one. Clara stood. 2. Sam looked between them, understanding dawning. So that's how it is. That's how it is, Bo confirmed, though Clara wasn't sure what either man meant. Well then. Sam rose, settling his hat. I'll round up Morrison boys and head back this way. Might take us an hour in this snow. You hold tight till then. After he left, Bo barred the door and checked the windows. Clara watched him move with economic efficiency, a man preparing for siege. You should go to the root cellar, he said, if things get ugly. I'm not hiding in a cellar while you face them alone. Clara? No. She moved to the window, peering out at the swirling snow. I stood up in that hall. I'll stand up here too. This is different. These men have been drinking, and Thomas has a grudge. Against me, for existing while tall, for refusing to disappear when he rejected me, for daring to speak in his precious town meeting. Clara turned from the window. I won't hide from Thomas Hale, not anymore. Bo studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Can you shoot? My father taught me. Said a woman alone needed to know how to defend herself. Smart man. Bo handed her a shotgun from the rack. This was Maggie's. She called it her discussion ender. Clara checked the action, pleased to find her hand steady. Did she ever need to use it? Once, a pack of wolves got too interested in the horses. She stood them off for an hour until I got back. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Never did see those wolves again. They took positions, Bo by the front window, Clara by the side. The waiting was the hardest part, minutes stretching like hours. The snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. There, Bo said quietly. Clara saw them dark shapes against the snow, moving unsteadily up the road. 7 men, just as Sam warned. She recognized Thomas Hale's stocky form in the lead. Remember, Bo said, we don't shoot unless they try to break in. Montana law's clear on defending your home, but only if they make the first move. The men reached the porch. Clara could hear their slurred voices. Thomas the loudest. McAllen open up, got business to discuss. Bo stayed silent. Know you're in there, saw the wagon. Thomas pounded on the door. Come out and face us like a man. State your business, Hale. Bo called finally. You know our business. You and that woman made fools of us tonight. Time to settle accounts. The vote was fair. Go home and sleep it off. Fair, Thomas laughed ugly. Having that giantess speak against us, letting a rejected mail-order bride lecture us about morality. Nothing fair about it. Clara's jaw clenched, but she kept silent. She's in there, isn't she? Another voice called Jasper Collins. Keeping warm in your bed, McAllen. Watch your tongue. Collins, Bo warned. Or what you'll let her fight for you again, hide behind another woman's skirts. The men laughed, emboldened by whiskey and numbers. Come out, Clara Redding. Thomas shouted. Face me proper. You were brave enough in the hall. How about now? Clara started to move, but Bo caught her arm. Don't! That's what he wants. I'm not afraid of him. I know, but this isn't about fear. It's about being smart. Outside, the taunts continued. Clara heard her name twisted into insults, her height mocked, her morals questioned. Each word was meant to wound, to provoke. Then came the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a bottle against the wall. That's enough, Bo shouted. You're on my property. Leave now, or face the consequences. Big talk from a man hiding inside. Thomas was working himself into a rage. Come out, both of you. Let's settle this proper. Like you settled things at the train station, Clara called out before she could stop herself. By running away from a woman who didn't match your expectations. Dead silence. Then Thomas's voice, low and vicious. You'll regret that? Clara heard him directing the others surround the cabin. Find another way in. Her grip tightened on the shotgun. Steady, Bo murmured. They're drunk and stupid, but not stupid enough to break down a door with guns behind it. But Thomas Hale's humiliation ran deeper than Bo knew. Clara heard the crash of something heavy hitting the back door. They'd found an axe or a log. That's breaking and entering. Bo called, I will defend my home. Another crash. The door shuddered. A last warning, Bo shouted. The third blow cracked wood. Clara saw the door splinter, saw a hand reach through. Bo's rifle cracked, the shot deliberately high, punching through the roof above the door. The hand vanished with a yelp. The next one won't be a warning, Bo shouted. For a moment, nothing. Then Clara heard horses, many horses, approaching fast. That'll be Sam, Bo said with relief. Sure enough. Sam Morrison's voice boomed through the night. Evening, boys bit late for social calls, isn't it? Clara peered out to see Sam and 4 other men, all armed, surrounding Thomas's group. This isn't your business, Morrison. Thomas slurred. Everything in this valley's my business when it involves good neighbors. Sam's voice hardened. Now, you boys can ride out peaceful. Or we can have what my dear departed wife used to call a discussion. Your choice. Faced with sober men and unfavorable odds. Thomas's courage evaporated. This isn't over. McCallan. Yes, Sam said firmly. It is. You lost the vote. Hale. Accept it like a man and move on. And if I hear about you bothering these folks again, we'll have more than words. Grumbling and cursing. Thomas and his men retreated to their horses. Clara watched them ride away, weaving drunkenly through the snow. Sam dismounted, approaching the cabin. Everyone all right in there? Bo unbarred the door. We're fine. Thank you. Sam, all of you. Don't thank us. Thank Miss Redding. Sam touched his hat to Clara. What you said tonight needed saying. Town's been letting the Hales and Cartwrights run things too long. About time someone reminded us what matters. The other men murmured agreement, and Clara felt something shift, not approval exactly, but respect. She'd stood tall in more ways than one tonight. After the Morrisons left, Bo and Clara worked together to shore up the damaged door. When it was secure enough for the night, they stood in the kitchen, suddenly aware they were alone again. You all right? Bo asked. Yes. Clara set down the shotgun with hands that trembled only slightly. Though I could use something stronger than coffee. Bo produced a bottle of whiskey from a high shelf, pouring 2 modest glasses. They drank in silence, letting the warmth chase away the night's chill. They'll make trouble other ways, Clara said eventually. Probably. But Sam Morrison carries weight in this town. Others too. You shifted something tonight, Clara. Gave people permission to think beyond their fear. I just spoke the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do. They stood close in the lamplight, the night's danger leaving them both raw and aware. Clara could see the concern in Bo's eyes, the way his hand clenched like he wanted to reach for her. I should check your cabin, he said roughly. Make sure they didn't... Tomorrow. Clara caught his sleeve. It can wait for tomorrow. They stood frozen, her hand on his arm, everything they couldn't say filling the space between them. Then Bo stepped back, the moment breaking. You take the bedroom, I'll keep watch. Clara wanted to protest, to say something about the impossibility of pretense after what they'd just shared, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she bid him good night and retreated to the familiar sanctuary of Margaret's room. But sleep eluded her. She lay listening to Bo moving quietly in the main room, adding wood to the fire, checking windows, standing guard as he'd done all night, as he'd done since the day he'd found her crying by his fence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Louisa Cartwright wouldn't forget tonight's humiliation. Thomas Hale would nurse his grudges. The town would buzz with fresh gossip about the woman who'd dared speak at the meeting, then sheltered in Beau McCallan's cabin while men tried to break down the door. But tonight, Clara had refused to shrink, had stood beside a good man and faced down those who would make her smaller, had earned the respect of people who mattered. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train with Thomas Hale's letters in her pocket. It was harder, lonelier, more uncertain. It was also more real than anything she'd known before. And for now, that was enough. The decision. The night that stayed. The train whistle cut through the December morning like a blade through silk. Clara stood on the platform where she'd arrived 3 months ago, valise in hand, but this time heading the opposite direction. The eastbound ticket burned in her pocket, purchased with wages honestly earned, not begged or borrowed. She'd made her decision the night before, after the confrontation at Beau's cabin, after the town meeting, after weeks of gossip and glares. The path seemed clear. Leave before winter deepened. Leave before her heart betrayed her further. Leave while she still could. The platform was nearly empty, just the station master and a few passengers boarding. No Thomas Hale to reject her. No Beau McCallan to offer shelter. Just Clara and the choice she'd made in the sleepless hours before dawn. Boarding in 5 minutes. Miss, the conductor called. Clara nodded, gripping her valise tighter. Inside were her few possessions and a letter from Beau, payment for her work and a reference that would help her find employment elsewhere. He'd left it at her cabin without a word, respecting her decision even as it carved lines deeper around his eyes. She'd stopped by the barn before dawn to say goodbye to the horses. Augustus had whickered softly, searching her pockets for carrots. Penelope had stood regally, as if understanding. The yearling had butted his head against her shoulder, leaving horsehair on Margaret's coat that Clara hadn't bothered to brush off. You running or choosing? Clara turned to find Sam Morrison's wife, Elizabeth, approaching with a market basket. The older woman's face showed curiosity, not judgment. I'm not sure there's a difference. Clara admitted. Oh, there's a difference. Running means you're letting them chase you off. Choosing means you're picking what's best for you, regardless of them. Elizabeth studied her shrewdly. So which is it? Clara looked down at her ticket. 3 months ago. I came here believing a man's letters. I thought if I could just be chosen once, I'd finally belong somewhere. And now? Now I know belonging isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you build, day by day, with work and courage and staying power. Sounds like choosing to me, Elizabeth said. Question is, what are you choosing? The train pulled in with a shriek of brakes and billowing steam. Passengers began disembarking while others prepared to board. Clara watched it all with a strange detachment, as if viewing someone else's life. He's at Miller's Ford, Elizabeth said quietly. Buying hay for the winter. Won't be back till evening. Clara understood. Beau had made himself absent, giving her the freedom to leave without goodbyes. It was like him considerate even in letting go. All aboard, the conductor called. Clara moved toward the train, then stopped. Through the steam and bustle, she saw Louisa Cartwright approaching with 2 other ladies, clearly intending to witness her departure. Their satisfied smiles told Clara everything about what her leaving meant to them. Victory, vindication, proof that tall, improper women who spoke out of turn always ended up where they belonged elsewhere. Clara's grip on the valise tightened. She thought of her first night in Montana, crying by Beau's fence, of Augustus trusting her touch through his colic, of standing in the town hall, speaking truth to people who didn't want to hear it. She thought of Beau's steady presence, never asking her to be smaller, only ever seeing her as enough. Miss, the conductor looked impatient. You boarding or not? Louisa and her companions had stopped near the platform, waiting for the satisfaction of seeing Clara climb aboard. Clara looked at the train, her escape, her retreat, her admission that they'd won. Then she looked at the mountains rising beyond town, at the vast sky that had taught her to breathe deeper, at the landscape that had demanded she become herself fully. "Miss?" the conductor repeated. Clara tore the ticket in half, then quarters, letting the pieces fall like snow onto the platform. "Not today." She turned and walked past Louisa Cartwright, whose mouth had fallen open in shock, past the other ladies, who whispered furiously, past the station master, who grinned behind his mustache. "Now you can't stay," Louisa called after her. "This town won't accept you." Clara paused, turned back. "This town doesn't have to accept me. Mrs. Cartwright, the horses do, the work does, the man who sees me as I am does. That's enough." She walked through town with her head high, valise swinging. A few people stared Clara Redding, the too tall woman who'd refused to leave. Mrs. Muller waved from the bakery. Jim Fletcher touched his cap. Small acknowledgments that meant everything. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun had climbed higher, warming the December air. Clara changed into her work clothes, split skirts, and sturdy boots that fit perfectly now, and set about the day's tasks. The horses greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, unaware of how close they'd come to losing their caretaker. She was repairing bridles when hoofbeats announced Beau's early return. Clara kept working, hearing him dismount, tend his horse, approach the barn with careful steps. He stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun. "Train came through this morning." "It did." "Elizabeth Morrison says you were at the station." "I was." He stepped inside, and Clara could see his face now carefully controlled but with hope flickering in his eyes. "With a ticket." "With a ticket," she confirmed, focusing on the bridle, "which I tore up and left on the platform for Louisa Cartwright to see." Beau's breath released in a rush. "Why?" Clara finally looked up. "Because running isn't choosing. Because I've spent my whole life letting other people's opinions chase me from place to place. Because," her voice caught, "because I stood in your kitchen last night, watching you guard the door against men who wanted to hurt us, and realized I didn't want to be anywhere else." He crossed the barn in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "Clara!" "I know what staying means," she interrupted. "More gossip, more judgment, more Louisa Cartwright trying to run me off. I know we can't, that you're still—" She gestured helplessly. "Still what?" His voice was rough. "Still mourning, still careful, still afraid to want something for myself after 3 years of emptiness." Clara's breath caught. "Beau!" "I went to Miller's Ford to buy hay," he said. "Spent the whole ride thinking about coming home to empty barns, empty cabin, empty life. Thinking about how you made this place feel alive again. How you stood tall in that town hall and showed me what real courage looks like." He reached out, fingers brushing hers where they gripped the bridle. "I loved Maggie. Part of me always will. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And for the first time in 3 years, I want to be here. Want to see what comes next. He stopped, jaw working. "Say it," Clara whispered, echoing her words from that night in her cabin. "Want you to stay, not as hired help, not as someone hiding from the world, but as whatever you're willing to be, to me, to this place." Clara set down the bridle with trembling hands. "I'm willing to be myself, tall, outspoken, improper, and absolutely certain that this is where I belong." "That's all I need," Beau said, and finally pulled her into his arms. Clara had imagined this might feel like betrayal of Maggie's memory, of propriety, of all the rules about how women should behave. Instead, it felt like coming home, like all the broken pieces of her life had led to this moment. This man who saw her height as strength, her voice as valuable, her presence as gift rather than burden. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "People will talk," he warned. "They already do." "Louisa will make our lives difficult." "She already has." I don't know how to do this," Court someone properly. It's been so long." Clara smiled. "I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who rejected me on sight. Proper courtship might be beyond us." He laughed the first full laugh she'd heard from him. "When you put it that way." "We'll figure it out," Clara said, day by day, like breaking horses or surviving storms or standing up to town councils. "Together." "Together," he agreed, and kissed her again. That evening, they sat on the porch of his cabin, their cabin, soon enough watching the sun set behind the mountains. The December air was sharp, but the coffee was hot and the company was right. "I should write to my sisters," Clara said. "Tell them I'm staying permanently." "What will you say?" Clara considered. "That I found work I'm good at, a place that needs me. A man who—" She paused, smiled. "A man who lets me be exactly as tall as I am." Beau's arm tightened around her. "That all?" "Maybe I'll mention the horses. Augustus would be offended if I didn't." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring challenges, it always did. But tonight, Clara was exactly where she chose to be. She'd bought a ticket to leave, had stood on the platform with escape in her hand. But in the end, staying was the bravest choice she'd ever made. Not because it was easy, it wasn't. Not because the town accepted her, they didn't. Not yet. But because somewhere between crying by a fence and standing in a town hall, between learning to trust horses and learning to trust herself, Clara had discovered that belonging wasn't about fitting into spaces others created. It was about claiming space for yourself, standing tall, speaking truth, choosing love over fear. The night deepened around them, vast and full of possibility. Inside the cabin, a fire waited to be lit. In the barn, horses dozed, trusting tomorrow would bring careful hands and patient voices. And on the porch, two people who'd learned the cost of loss chose to risk their hearts again. Clara had torn up her ticket, had chosen to stay, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where and who she wanted to be. Her first night was supposed to be with someone else, but the cowboy was the one who stayed. A week had passed since Clara tore up her train ticket, a week of small adjustments, careful negotiations of space, and the quiet revolution of two lives learning to intertwine. The December sun cast long shadows across fresh snow as Clara and Beau sat on the bench behind the main barn, sheltered from the wind. She was mending a shirt, one of his, the elbow worn through from years of work. Her fingers, once meant only for fine embroidery, now moved with confident skill through the heavier fabric. Beside her, Beau read a letter from the Territorial Council about grazing rights, occasionally sharing relevant portions aloud. "They're confirming the Pint Ridge decision," he said. "Thomas Hale filed a formal complaint, but it was dismissed." "Good." Clara tied off her thread, examined her work. "Though I doubt that'll stop him from trying other schemes." "Probably not, but Sam Morrison's keeping an eye on things. Says half the town's talking about your speech still." "And the other half?" "The other half is Louisa Cartwright, talking twice as loud to make up for it." Clara laughed, surprising herself with how easy it had become. A month ago, Louisa's gossip had felt like wolves at the door. Now it seemed as distant and irrelevant as thunder over far mountains. "Letter came for you too," Beau said, producing an envelope from his pocket. From Philadelphia. Clara recognized her sister Ruth's handwriting. She'd finally written to her family about her decision to stay, to make a life in Montana with a man who valued her strength. Their response had taken 3 weeks to arrive. She opened it slowly, Beau's presence beside her steady and reassuring. "Dear Clara," she read aloud. "We received your letter with considerable shock. Mother's cousin, Mrs. Pemberton, says she knows of the McAllen family by reputation, cattle people. She says, as if it were a disease. We cannot understand why you would choose such a hard life when Harold's brother remains unmarried and would likely overlook your particular qualities, given his own limitations. Bo made a sound that might have been amusement or disgust. Clara continued, "However, we suppose you are set on this course. Please know you will always have a home here should you come to your senses, perhaps when the novelty wears off and you remember the comforts of civilization. Ruth." She folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her pocket. "Warm family you have," Bo observed dryly. "They mean well, in their way. They just can't imagine wanting anything beyond what they know." Clara picked up another shirt from the mending basket. "I used to think like them, that if I could just fit properly into their world, I'd be happy." "What changed?" "I met a man who offered me a warm cabin without asking anything in return. I discovered I could calm a colicking horse with my voice and hands. I stood up in a town hall and spoke truth even though my knees shook." She glanced at him. "I learned that being too much for some people meant being exactly enough for others." Bo's hand found hers on the bench between them. "You were never too much, Clara. The world was just too small." They sat quietly, watching the sun dip toward the mountains. The horses in the near pasture grazed peacefully, Augustus occasionally lifting his head to check their location. The ranch spread around them, not vast by Montana standards, but solid, real, theirs to build together. "I've been thinking," Bo said eventually, "about the cabin situation." Clara's hand stilled on the mending. They'd been carefully maintaining separate residences, though the pretense fooled no one and satisfied even fewer. "It's not practical," he continued. "2 fires to maintain, 2 sets of supplies, all this back and forth in the snow." "No," Clara agreed carefully. "It's not practical." "And people are talking anyway. Might as well give them something worth discussing." "Such as?" He turned to face her fully. "Such as making it official, legal, proper, even by certain standards." Clara's breath caught. "Bo McCallan, are you proposing while I'm holding your torn shirt?" "Would you prefer I wait until your mucking stalls?" Despite the joke, his eyes were serious, uncertain. Clara set aside the mending and took both his hands in hers. "I came here to marry a stranger based on letters," she said. "Stood on a train platform in my best dress, believing I'd found my future. That was the foolish dream of a desperate woman." Bo's face tightened, but she squeezed his hands. "This," she continued, "sitting here with you, hands rough from honest work, planning a life built on shared labor and mutual respect, this is the reality I choose. Yes, Bo. Yes to making it official. Yes to giving Louisa Cartwright the apoplexy she so richly deserves. Yes to all of it." His kiss was answer enough, there in the fading light with the horses as witnesses. They were married a week later, on December 23rd, in the smallest ceremony Dry Hollow had ever seen. Sam and Elizabeth Morrison stood as witnesses. Pastor Edwards, who'd initially expressed concerns about the match, performed the service after Sam had what he called a friendly conversation with the man. Clara wore Margaret's green dress, the one that fit her perfectly, with her head high and her heart full. Bo wore his good suit and a smile that transformed his weathered face. When Pastor Edwards reached the part about "speak now or forever hold your peace," Sam Morrison cleared his throat meaningfully, and the small gathering held its breath. But no one spoke. Even Louisa Cartwright, who'd threatened to object publicly, remained silent in her pew, perhaps finally understanding that some battles weren't worth fighting. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, their ranch now, in every way that mattered. Clara had moved her few belongings to the main cabin that morning, her presence already making it feel more like a home. Her books joined his on the shelf, her coat hung beside his by the door. Small changes that meant everything. That evening, as snow began to fall, they sat by their fire, one fire now, not two, and Clara read aloud from one of her books while Bo worked on repairing a harness. The domesticity of it should have felt strange after so many years alone for both of them. Instead, it felt like puzzle pieces finally fitting together. "I never thanked you," Clara said suddenly, setting down the book. For what? For the note that first day, the map to your cabin. You didn't know me, had no reason to help, but you did anyway. I knew enough. Bo said simply. Saw a woman refusing to break despite having every reason to. That told me what I needed to know. Still, thank you. Thank you for staying, for choosing this, for, he gestured at the cabin, the fire, their life, for making it all mean something again. Clara rose and went to him, settling beside him in the large chair that accommodated them both. I never expected this. When I stepped off that train, when Thomas ran away, when I sat crying by your fence, I never imagined I'd find home in the last place I looked. Where else would it be? Bo asked, arm settling around her. The best things usually are in the last place we look. Otherwise, we'd stop looking too soon. Outside, the snow continued, blanketing the world in fresh white. Tomorrow there would be horses to tend, chores to complete, probably fresh gossip to ignore. But tonight, Clara June Redding. Now Clara McCallan sat with her husband in their home, finally understanding the difference between being chosen and choosing for herself. She thought of that first night in this cabin, alone and heartbroken, feeding Thomas Hale's letters to the fire, how she'd believed those ashes were the end of her story. Now she knew better. They'd been compost for something new to grow something stronger, truer, built on mutual respect rather than desperate hope. What are you thinking? Bo asked, feeling her quiet. That I'm glad Thomas Hale was a coward. Glad he took one look at me and ran. If he'd been brave enough to accept my height, I'd be on some ranch right now, trying to make myself smaller to fit his expectations. And I'd still be talking to horses and ghosts. The horses will be devastated to lose their conversationalist. They'll manage. They have you now. Clara smiled against his shoulder. We make a good team. The best, he agreed. And in the firelight, with snow falling soft outside and their whole future stretching ahead, Clara knew it was true. She'd traveled 2,000 miles looking for someone who would say yes to her. Instead, she'd found someone who helped her say yes to herself. And that, she thought as sleep began to claim her, warm and safe in the arms of a man who saw her truly, that was worth every moment of doubt, every cutting whisper, every tear shed by a stranger's fence. Her first night was supposed to be with someone else, but life, Clara had learned, rarely followed the plans we made. Sometimes it gave us something better instead. Sometimes it gave us exactly what we needed, disguised as what we never expected. And sometimes, if we were very lucky and very brave, it gave us home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Stories 1850. Hit the like button. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world to me.